Yes, the stories almost no one is telling, but should be. Hello there, I'm Anna Botting. I work at Sky News. And as we saw there, local news should not be a luxury item. It really should be a necessity. As we all know, community journalism binds neighbours together. It gives cohesion. It gives vitality. It can expose wrongdoing or corruption by officials who are having the most impact on our lives, holding power to account where we live and where we work. And when those local, thank you for the clap. When those local news watchdogs are not watching, we are left in the dark. We're being impacted, but knowing nothing. So please welcome then two people helping fill the vacuum left by what we mostly call the sad decline of local news. One with a camera, one with a laptop. So please welcome documentary filmmaker Jeanie Finlay and Joshi Herrmann, who founded and runs Mill Media, an independent newsletter and website producing high-quality, in-depth local journalism. And both of you doing amazing work, I have to say. Jeanie, let's start with you. Yours is a story of a local community devastated by historic pollution, toxic industrial waste. Your documentary follows Stan, a fisherman for more than 50 years on Teesside in the northeast of England. He becomes an unwitting activist, pushing back against the local government when the fishing ecosystem collapses from industrial toxins released during dredging of the River Tees. You describe it as a David and Goliath story. Was it getting any coverage, and how did you find out about it?
Well, thanks for that introduction. This is a story that's really close to my heart because it's where I grew up. It's where my mum swims in the sea 3 times a week. And as soon as I heard about the story, I just knew that I had to, I make feature-length documentaries, and I knew that this was going to be my next film. It's been getting some local coverage, but it's really the difference you can make with 100 minutes filmed over 4 years it's infinitely different to a 3-minute piece on local news or a tiny story in the local paper. And the local paper is not what it was. The Northern Echo is not what it was in Harry Evans' time. They're not able, and also there's some conflicts going on there that it's quite challenging to tell the stories of actually what's going on in the area.
Well, you had me, I have to say, at the opening credits. It is beautifully shot. The subject matter makes you want to weep, quite frankly. And it is not yet released in the UK. Stan really is to Teesside fishing what Alan Bates was to the post office, let's be honest about it. So shall we have a look at your documentary then? It's called All Rivers Spill Their Stories to the Sea. Let's have a look.
On my mum's side, you can trace our fishing back 400 or 500 years. And they're all fisher folk from just in front of where I live, fished from the beach.
What's your view then about why the government just won't get to the answer?
We stupid thick fishermen, they're educated and it sticks out like a sore thumb.
Yeah, right.
Problem is that sees jobs worth billions.
Of course it is.
Ours is worth $1 million. That's the difference. It's that. So they're not interested in us.
Levelling up. They've levelled Teesside down to ground, and it has been for decades. And it's terrible the way we're treated.
Can't sell boats, can't give them away, nobody wants them. I have 3. So I'll probably bring my neck in it. You know what I mean? I should be 6'3" and I'm not only 5'6".
And told, we can't rock the boat. The local authority advertises with the paper, and the paper can't upset the relationship with Tees Valley Combined Authority. The media in the UK is so focused on London and Westminster that there's no scrutiny, there's no resources to scrutinise what's happening in a place like this.
Yes, big round of applause. Very well deserved as well, I have to say. Terrible footage of the crustaceans there. They're twitching on the beach in some of the footage. the fishermen lamenting their appalling catches. You track the timeline of what happened. A dredger, it seems, disturbing ground, polluted over decades from chemical oil steelworks, the heartland, the industrial heartland that Teesside's known for. Has the loss of local news left a void in which these stories are not being told? It gives a voice to those genuinely who feel that no one is listening to them.
I think so, yeah. I mean, like I said, the luxury of making a feature-length documentary, an independent documentary, means that I can do something that is much more than a caricature. I can get to know Stan, and I can foreground the emotion. What does this feel like? I'm over the shoulder while Stan launches a crowdfunding campaign to bring independent scientists together because they're just not getting the answers. And it's been devastating. Science is slow, movement is slow, and they're just trying to find, they just want someone to listen to them because it's been forgotten. And when I showed Stan the finished film, he said that the experience has been like a bereavement, and actually being able to show that change over time because time had elapsed felt like he'd been seen for the first time, and it was very moving.
And as we know, those who are not being heard change politics. You might argue the Brexit count was like that. We'll see what the politics of protest are in the elections tomorrow as well. But Joshi, you started with one digital newspaper in Manchester. Since then, you've expanded into 5 more cities, so 6 in total. You've got another one coming very soon, haven't you? So what made you decide to report on life politics and more on this community or city level, and how are you going about it?
Well, I think one of the reasons I wanted to do it is because there are so many good stories. I mean, Jeannie's amazing film is an amazing story that the national media were not covering very much, and the local media, which has been really kind of like pulled back to the bones, especially in the Northeast, but really anywhere, are not able to cover it in a sustained way. And so there are stories like that all across the country. And so local journalism has been hit much harder by the forces that we've been talking about today than national journalism has. I mean, there were, I think, around 9,000 people who worked in local journalism in 2007 in the UK, just for the largest 3 companies, by the way, but that's a sort of rough estimate from Press Gazette. And now they think it's around 3,000. So that's like 6,000 fewer in the space of, not very long at all. And so I guess when I started out, I thought, there must be loads of really good stories here, and I think it'll be fun to try and tell them. And I think there'll be some social good out of it too. And actually, I remembered as we were walking in, the last time I was here at Truth Tellers on stage, I got off the stage and I went up to a little room that Tina's team had provided. And I was on the phone to our lawyer, and I was on the phone to Jack Dillhunty, who's a brilliant journalist who works for us and who's here. And Jack was just about to publish a story about a local official in Manchester, Andy Burnham's advisor, Sacha Lord. And Jack's story revealed that Sacha Lord had a company that had sort of illegitimately got hold of hundreds of thousands of pounds during the pandemic from the government in pandemic relief by pretending it was one kind of company when it in fact was another. And within 2 days of Truth Tellers, or perhaps even a day, Sacha Lord was threatening to sue us, etc., etc. It took us a few days of solid reporting to get the government to change its position, to get the Greater Manchester Authority to change its position. It took 7 months of Jack reporting on this story for the Arts Council to eventually say, you guys were right, we got it wrong, we're going to ask for the money back. And that's public money, So there's a lot of stories like this, and it later transpired that the local newspaper in Manchester did know about this story and hadn't reported on it. So there are loads of these stories. Jeannie's told an amazing one. There are so many of these stories that because of the decimation of local journalism are not being told, and it's a great challenge to try and rebuild that infrastructure.
Well, you're trying to build a community. I know you have live events for mill members where staff come on stage and explain their favourite stories. So let's try that here, shall we?
Yeah.
Why don't you give us some of your favourite stories from the past year?
Well, one that really stands out for me actually is one about a university called the University of Greater Manchester. Anyone who remembers what it used to be called Bolton University. They changed the name to attract foreign students, I think. And one of my reporters, Molly Simpson, who was here last year, I think, another brilliant young journalist, she over months discovered that there was a secret side deal, which is on screen now, in which a senior executive at the university was effectively attempting to divert large amounts of money to a private company that he owned. And, it took probably a few different stories to get to this one. This was probably the biggest one. But after this came out, things really started to happen. And eventually what happened was the police in Greater Manchester announced an investigation. The vice chancellor of the university of 20 years stepped down, or was suspended, actually. And then they had police house raids on 7 properties. So now there's an active, live police investigation. And that's an incredible piece of reporting, and I think that's one where you can see the impact. Another one, I was told it was going to be on screen. I don't think I'm actually allowed to really talk about it because there's just been an arrest. I don't know if you can show the next story. So I think there was another story about. Here we go. So it's just been long-listed for the poor foot. So I think I'm allowed to read out what Private Eye said about it. But effectively, this was a very sort of litigious lawyer who was writing to homeowners in actually, various places that we cover. And it took months of really good reporting to really bring the story to light. I think because he's now been arrested, contempt rules mean I can't really sort of say much about it, but I think I can read out the police statement, which is, detectives investigating allegations linked to the purchase and sale of freeholds in Sheffield have arrested a man on suspicion of fraud and blackmail. I think that's probably all that can be said. But again, that's really focused investigative journalism. I mean, you can see how many of my colleagues are named on that awards nomination. That's a lot of people working incredibly hard, led by Daniel Timms. That's the kind of journalism that unfortunately a lot of local newspapers, for a variety of reasons, are not able to take on anymore.
Yeah, exactly. What about some of the problems that you're butting into effectively? You're from Teesside, where your film is set, but your funding came from across the world, even in New York. Why did you have to look so far away? What about the local outrage for that story? What did it take you to tell that story?
I think as an independent maker, I know that once I'm making a film, I can set the tone, and I know that the title, my long title of my film, will be the title I want to have, and that I can have editorial control. So it's vital that the funding is independent. And there is money in the North, but when the money for film comes across the desk of the local authority that you are critiquing, it means that it's no longer an option. So this is a local story that has global consequences and a global audience, so we look globally for the money. So working with brilliant partners like Chicken and Egg, BFI Doc Society, it means that we can remain independent and do the independent work that would be absolutely impossible if we were making this for a streamer. I need to be nimble. I need to have a small camera and not, and not make something. I'm not making streamer content, I'm making independent filmmaking.
Well, the first session we had this morning, we heard about the pre-litigation that news stories are having now, and the fact that we pre-censor ourselves. But for a small independent, if I can call you that now, I know you're expanding quite quickly, how difficult is it to take on the so-called establishment, and how worrisome then is a legal threat for an independent operation like yours?
I think at the moment in the UK, the threat of legal action is a huge reason that big stories don't appear. A big reason. I mean, that story I told you before about Sacha Lord, the one in Manchester, a couple of newspapers were going to follow it up a day after we published, and they didn't because of the legal threat that was made. They didn't do that. I was downstairs earlier, and someone I knew said, "How's your legal case going?" And I said, "Which one?" I've got 2. We were in the High Court recently defending a defamation action for a story we published on The Londoner, which is our London operation. I'll be in a court in Liverpool in June defending another case that's been brought against us for our journalism. So currently the way the laws are written in the UK allows people to bring bad faith lawsuits against stories that are true and that have been really well reported. And I think until the government acts and changes the law, there has been some protection put into the law about anti-slaps when it comes to financial stories. But what you really need is for that to be extended to lots of other forms of journalism, because at the moment, it is a big drain on our time and on our resources.
Well, aren't you battling one this week, is it?
Well, I mean, you know, just on Friday night, we did a story on The Dispatch, which is our Birmingham publication about the Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, and her special advisor, 7 p.m. on a Friday night, sent an incredibly aggressive legal threat. He threatened us with defamation, privacy, and potentially an imminent injunction in the High Court to stop us publishing. I mean, I think he did that because he thought this is a small local publication in Birmingham and I can bully them. And then as soon as we got back in touch and said, hang on, we don't appreciate those kind of threats and we're going to make your threats part of the story, we put them in, paragraph 5 was about the threats and we named the advisor because I think it's important to name people when they threaten you. Suddenly, he said, well, actually, it wasn't sent from a government, from the government. Well, it came from a government email. You signed it off special advisor to the Home Secretary. So it sure felt like it came from the government. And the government, threatening to sue a small independent media company, I don't think that's quite right. So that is the kind of threat that I know is stopping publication of important stories, particularly in local journalism across the country every day. And I think it's got to be fixed.
Well, just one final thought. I worked in the Northeast as well, in local news. It's very close to my heart. I saw the last 5 coal mines close. I saw the last shipyard close as well, with all the Labour politicians in tears as a Type 23 left Swan Hunter. I felt like I was witnessing the end of the Industrial Revolution, quite honestly. What you've seen is ecosystem disaster as the heritage of manufacturing is literally removed.
Yeah.
And the question is how much, we should suffer to see progress. And we know planning laws in this country, they want to speed them up. There are more free ports being built. This was all to build Teesport. Do you feel like you're telling the parable of an age, really?
Yeah, I really feel like this, the fishers of Teesside are the canary in the coal mine.
That's the one, yes.
There's another 10 free ports planned around the UK, and most of them are where the river meets the sea. I think only one of them is inland. That needs to be done incredibly carefully. When I was an art student in Middlesbrough, we used to go out and paint the industry. It was the opening of Blade Runner by Ridley Scott was inspired by by Teesside industry. These things have a long life. All of the seal pups in the area have died because of PCBs that were banned in the 1980s. We need to remember history or we will continually repeat it.
And one final thought from you as well, Joshi. Sir Harry Evans obviously worked up there. You were telling us earlier that actually, what you can see in the history of the Northern Echo really does explain the demise of local media.
Totally. I mean, he started his career on the Ashton-under-Lyne Reporter, which is near where I live, and then he went to the Northern Echo. And at the Northern Echo, when he was there in the 1960s, you had an enormous team. You had hundreds of people working in the Northern Echo. And I actually looked in his book, and there were 12 reporters in the Bishop
Auckland.
Bishop Auckland office of the Northern Echo. Jeanie and I have been trying to estimate whether there are still 12 reporters in the entire Northern Echo now. And I think they're probably, it would be about that. So that is a very, very big decline in the number of people trying to find stories in a very important part of the country. And we need to try and sort of rebuild that capacity, I think.
Well, times, they are a-changing, as we all know, in the world of media. Your work is extraordinary. Congratulations from me, certainly. So, Jeanie, Finlay, Joshi, Herrmann, thank you very much indeed. And one final thought as well, before you clap. There are more films to be seen tomorrow at the Truth Tellers Docfest. All the details are coming on your screen, so do stay tuned for that. Both of you, thank you.
Thank you.